Why is it like this in the USA? You don't have mega-sized cereal for mega-sized people? Large corporations don't own the entire shelf? You're telling me that's high fructose corn syrup?
I got tagged a bunch in this video and he didn't really answer the question. He just showed you a bunch of ingredients and ultra-processed foods and then told you about his wellness tests and products at the end. So I'll answer it. Why is America like this? In America, we have a capitalist economy that's driven by pro-corporation deregulatory policies. Policies that have enabled corporations to prioritize profits and growth above all other values, including people's health. Our current food environment, which is about 70% ultra-processed foods by some estimates, is not because of some conspiracy. It's the logical conclusion of policies that enable corporate expansion with little regulation. So how did we get here? In the early 1980s, under the Reagan administration, agriculture and food policy shifted dramatically toward deregulation and pro-industry approaches. Pro-corporation policies during this time also favored large agribusiness at the expense of small family-owned farms, which exacerbated the farm crisis of the 1980s and led to the consolidation of the food environment. As a result, there was a loss of local food systems and a greater reliance on industrialized food production that could travel far, which really fueled the dominance of these prepackaged ultra-processed foods. Now, at the same time, the shareholder value movement was gaining momentum, which reinforced the idea that the primary responsibility of corporations was to maximize shareholder returns. For food companies, this meant that they not only had to sell food in an increasingly competitive environment where there was already too much food per person, but they also had to show growth and report that growth to Wall Street every 90 days. How do you do that? How do you continue to show profits and growth in a food environment where there's already too many calories per person available? Well, you cut costs by using the cheapest ingredients possible. You diversify the number of food products that you have, especially those that are hyperpalatable with a lot of salt, sugar, and fat, and low in other nutrients like fiber and other micronutrients. You lobby politicians to support deregulation efforts so that you can easily market to children and low-income populations without a lot of barriers. You lobby for subsidies to keep the cost of crops in your foods low. You lobby for lax antitrust laws to enable mergers and acquisitions so that very few corporations own the majority of our food supply. And ultimately, after a few decades of this, where profit and growth are what's most important to corporations and politicians who need money from those corporations enable those corporations, you're left with a food environment that prioritizes profits above all else, including people's health. You're left with labor and economic inequalities. You're left with food deserts where in many areas of this country, produce and fresh foods are scarce and ultra-processed foods are abundant. And you're left with health consequences, which disproportionately affect low-income populations, which are the communities hit hardest. We haven't even discussed how this system has fueled the rise of individualism, where health is no longer looked at as a shared social responsibility, but instead as a personal choice. All while cuts to social programs and public health funding have meant fewer resources to address the social determinants of health, which disproportionately affect low-income populations, and has resulted in a 15-year age gap difference between the highest and lowest income groups. While the wellness industry flourishes, using fear and guilt to focus on individual habits, while distracting from the systemic issues and policies that have led to this unhealthy food environment and our health issues in the first place. This is not some sort of conspiracy. This is the logical conclusion of our pro-corporation deregulatory policies where corporations thrive and public health suffers that started accelerating in the 1980s and continues to be strongly supported by the incoming administration.